Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and just to preview it, what we're going to be talking about today, going right from the top down. The Giants, they had a very impressive victory. We'll talk about them first. We'll transition to the Jets, and then, of course, the Bills. We're going to give them a little mention here. We haven't talked about them in a while. They're not one of our main teams we cover, but they've been one of the darn good teams right now in New York, so we should mention them for a little bit. We'll talk Bills, and then we got a lot of offseason baseball news that will take place here soon involving the Cubs, the Mets, and a trade the White Sox made earlier this week. So, Swig, welcome in. How excited are you about the New York Giants right now?
Man, I can't believe we pulled that off. I'm not going to lie, man. I did not think the Giants had a chance in that game if Daniel Jones was playing. I didn't think it was going to be a realistic one for the Giants to go on the road to Seattle, where they're always so dangerous, to actually pull that off. But got to give them a lot of credit. That defense was ridiculously good, even better than usual. And McCoy did enough. The running game was outstanding, and they pulled it off.
Yeah, Alfred Morris scored a touchdown for the first time since 2017, and it was Colt McCoy, who didn't do a lot, but he did enough to get the job done. And you mentioned how you wanted how you thought Daniel Jones would be a great fit playing that game because you wanted to see what he could do against that Seattle defense, but you never got to see that opportunity, at least not yet. Maybe you could see it in the postseason at some point, but you never know. Giants came out there and won, and that's the big thing. It was a huge statement victory for them right now in the season.
It was. It's definitely the biggest win the Giants have had in 4 seasons. There's no question about that. It's a big road upset. Really goes to show the improvement that the team has made here internally over the course of the season. We've seen that on both sides of the ball, but especially here on defense, where they've really solidified a bunch of things. But we'll address them one side of the ball at a time. I'll start with offense, and Colt McCoy, of course, getting the start for Jones. He basically did enough to win. He didn't make the big mistake, and that's basically all you can ask for out of a backup. I think the best plays he made on the day were on the Giants' final drive, where he had a couple of completed passes, one to Slayton, one to Tate, I believe, that extended that drive, ran some more clock, and got the Giants into a position where they could at least pin Seattle back on that final drive. So he did enough, which is great. He got his first win in 6 years, but I think the real story offensively is the running game and how fantastic the offensive line was. That's been a theme here in recent weeks, a major improvement. Andrew Thomas has been significantly better, which is a great sign. Even Cam Fleming got in on it, and the Giants went back to their offensive line rotation with Hernandez and Shane Lemieux at guard and rotating Matt Parrott in at tackle, and they all did their jobs, and Wayne Gallman had an amazing game, and Morris finished off the work he did on those drives with the touchdowns.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, you looked at this offensive line. I think they're much better in run blocking. They've looked really well here soon. But look at what they've done in the past these last 2 weeks. Yes, you give up 2 sacks this last week. One was on a safety blitz from Jamal Adams. But, I mean, it's still really phenomenal how they're really piecing it together right now. I think they deserve a lot of credit over there with the offensive line. You mentioned how Wayne Gallman, 135 scoreless yards. I mean, you mentioned, you remember the league and what they always talk about, a touchdown vulture, and that's exactly what Alfred Morris played there. So great job from the Giants run game. Colt McCoy did what he needed to. The splits, I would assume they would have gone more run heavy, but it was only 30 rush to 22 pass. I'm excited to see how the Giants will go down the stretch. The NFC East is starting to look like a fairly decently competitive division, with Washington playing well and the Giants playing well right now.
Yeah, right now it's looking like a 2-team race between those teams. I would be more excited about the Giants until Washington beat Pittsburgh earlier today. And the Giants do have the tiebreaker, but I do think Washington has a significantly easier schedule here these last 4 games. The Giants do have the tiebreaker because they won both head-to-head matchups, but they're following a similar blueprint. Both of them, their defenses, I think, have been the main element in their success. The Washington football team has that fantastic defensive front. The Giants, I think their biggest strength right now is in the secondary. But one guy I really wanted to single out on the offensive line besides Thomas has been Nick Gates, the center. He has been better and better every single week in run and pass protection. And this is somebody you got to remember. The Giants signed originally as a swing tackle, an undrafted free agent out of Nebraska who was thought to have the versatility to move into guard. Gates basically learned the center position in this truncated offseason in the middle of a pandemic and limited practices. And he's been getting better and better every week. It's been a really important part of the offensive line's success. He's a real mauler in the run game. We've seen a decent start here out of Shane Lemieux, the rookie 5th-round pick as well. The one thing I would say, though, is I do think Will Hernandez should be starting at left guard. But Lemieux has been solid considering he's a rookie 5th-round pick, but he does struggle in pass protection, and that is something where Hernandez is without question an upgrade. And I do think they should go primarily back to him in terms of that offensive line rotation.
Well, let's switch to the defense real quick. The defense looked phenomenal. Patrick Graham deserves a raise. He might get some head coaching consideration. Maybe that's a little stale, little bit of a long shot there, maybe. But Patrick Graham has been a phenomenal defensive coordinator this year, scheming well. He's done a great job of getting players to maximize their potential. We didn't see a Nico Lallo's pick this week, but we did see one from Darnay Holmes, who really stepped up there at the interception, of course. And then you also had a good performance from Tay Crowder as well.
And don't forget, Lalos did recover the fumble on the 3rd and 1, I believe, in the second quarter. So 2 games and 2 turnovers he came up with. But Graham, are you kidding me? That was just the cherry on top so far, and an amazing defensive performance. One thing that we've talked about in the past, and that I've mentioned on previous episodes, is that he really values versatility in the Giants' defense, and we're seeing that more and more at all levels. So in this game, especially, the Giants mixed up their defensive fronts to confuse the offensive line, get a free rusher freed up. We saw that with Crowder once or twice. We saw it with Carter Coughlin and Jabril Peppers as well, just being creative with edge rushers, safeties all over the place. And then the Giants were disguising their coverages on the back end to confuse Russell Wilson, which is not an easy thing to do, but it worked. Seattle has that very play action heavy offense where they hold the ball a long time. And like I mentioned last week, the Giants are going for that pass coverage over pass rush approach in terms of they want to keep everything straightened out on the back end, have the good coverage, and eventually they generate pressure with 4. And that's exactly what happened in this game. And Leonard Williams in particular was fantastic. I got to give him a lot of credit.
Yeah, something Jets fans don't want to hear, but I think that was one of Leonard Williams' best games of his career. 2.5 sacks. That's big time. That's almost 3 sacks in a game. Yes, the Seahawks offensive line isn't the best, but that's a credit to some of the coverage that the Giants have been putting on him. Wilson didn't have anywhere to go. He usually escapes, but he couldn't against the Giants. So great job on the defensive side. Special teams still has a little bit to be desired, but it's still interesting for sure.
Well, we can get into the special teams in a minute. There's definitely more, I think, to talk about with the defense. You mentioned Darnay Holmes, who came up with that interception, rookie 4th-round slot corner. He has been getting better each week as well. He played really well in the Cincinnati game last week, and he was even better here in the Seattle game. Bradbury was really solid on the outside yet again. Limited Metcalf, who still made a few very nice plays, but kept him from making that big play over the top. Outside of one 20-yard catch in the first quarter, Tyler Lockett wasn't much of a factor in this game either. Isaac Yiadom has been getting better as that second corner. He's far from perfect. I still think it's a place the Giants would like to upgrade, is that second corner spot, but he's definitely settled in after a rough start. And one more thing I want to point out is that the Giants edge rushers, they're down to some of their 3rd-string guys at this point, because Kyler Fackrell is on injured reserve. He's going to miss a couple of games. Lorenzo Carter and O'Shane Jimenez, a couple 3rd-round picks, are out for the season. And Marcus Golden was traded to Arizona a few weeks ago. So the starting edge guys right now are Jabal Sheard and Carter Coughlin, but they both played very well in this game, and they're getting a lot of production out of a lot of unheralded guys, a lot of rookies in this year's class. Crowder was the very last pick in this draft, for example, and Logan Ryan and Jabril Peppers have both been really, really good on that back end as well. There have been a lot of great signs. The coverage has been amazing, and they're getting a little bit better up front as well.
I think one name that Patrick Graham has really helped develop and turn into a great football player is Jabril Peppers. I mean, my goodness, there were times early on in his career where he looked lost. Of course, he was a big man from Michigan. Everyone, he could do everything. Michigan's wishing they could play him a quarterback right now. But man, it's crazy how much he's improved this year. You talk about Jabal Sheard. I always thought he was underrated going back to his time with the Colts. I mean, he's had some seasons with about 6 sacks. So I'm a big Jabal Sheard fan. I don't know why he ended up on a practice squad. I mean, this guy's a pretty decent to solid defensive end in the NFL.
He is, and he, I think, had his best game as a Giant here against Seattle. Going back, I think Peppers and Leonard Williams both, they are the two players that are thriving the most under Patrick Graham's scheme because they're being lined up all over the place. In Peppers' case, mostly in the box. He's been better in coverage as well. He had a couple of really nice plays. The Seahawks had a field goal on their first drive, and Peppers had a really nice breakup in the end zone to limit them to 3 instead of 7. And Williams has been lined up over the center, over the guard, lined up as a 3 technique. He's just been all over. And the Giants have also done a lot of experimenting with only having one lineman with their hand in the dirt or possibly two, and then just confusing the offensive line, making it look like Peppers is going to blitz sometimes or Logan Ryan, and then they back out. They bring a linebacker late. It's just there's a lot of creativity there. Those two are thriving. Peppers had that one play where he just blew up Chris Carson, who was in pass protection, and got that sack on Russell Wilson. It was a lot like what Jamal Adams did to Deion Lewis on the other side of the ball. They both were all over the field. I'm not trying to compare Peppers to Jamal Adams or anything, but the improvement that he has shown has been fantastic because he really bottomed out in that first game against Philadelphia, but it's been a steady improvement since.
It has for sure. And one name that I want to also bring up before we switch over to special teams is Blake Martinez. He's been a lock since joining the Giants. I mean, a great tackling machine. Green Bay's run defense, it hasn't been shown, but their run defense is a weakness, I think. And that's a huge credit to what Blake Martinez brought to that front. He was a tackling machine, over 100 tackles multiple times in his career. He's a solid tackling machine. I mean, that's one word to describe him, as a tackling machine.
No, I get it. But Blake Martinez, I think you can make the argument, is the most indispensable player on the Giants defense outside of possibly Bradbury, because as great as Leonard Williams has been, they have some other guys like Dalvin Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence, BJ Hill, who can at least partially make up for what he brings to the table if he were to go out. Or with Jabril Peppers, you also have Logan Ryan back there. You have Xavier McKinney, who's healthy and starting to get sprinkled into defense. But Martinez has brought a stability to the Giants linebacker position that they desperately needed. The Giants linebacker room is still the weakest position on that defense without question, but Martinez has been a sure tackler, which is a very important thing that he brings to the table, because as good as Yadam has played and as good as Peppers has been, sometimes they miss some easier tackles, or Darnay Holmes had 1 or 2 missed tackles in this game. But Martinez kind of has exceeded my expectations in coverage as well, because I kind of thought that he would be solid against the run in the box, but a liability in coverage, basically a better Alec Ogletree. But he's been a lot better than just a better Alec Ogletree. He's been the Giants', I'd say, second best defender all season. He just really has been significantly better than I expected, because I wasn't thrilled with that signing at first, but he's another guy who's been really good in Graham's defense. He's been effective in the box. He's been effective as a pass rusher, and the Giants really have his value to the defense cannot be overstated, because the rest of that linebacker room is still a work in progress.
What didn't you like out of the special teams in these last couple of weeks that you've seen from that unit?
Well, the kick coverage has definitely left a lot to be desired. There's no question about that. Obviously, the touchdown in the Cincinnati game, and then in this Seattle game, Dixon was going to punt. They had the punt blocked. Thankfully for the Giants, the Seattle player who recovered that was out of bounds just before he got possession. Otherwise, that's a touchdown instead of a safety, and that made it 5-0. And the safety punt was almost broken back for a touchdown as well. That went to midfield. So I guess I know that's technically a punt, but it's basically the principle of kick coverage on that play, and it's definitely been an area of weakness in recent weeks. The Nate Ebner, the special teams ace for the Giants, just basically let the Seattle gunner just go straight through the middle unblocked and block the punt from Dixon. So that's definitely something that Joe Judge is going to want to clean up, knowing his special teams background, and the fact that it's come very close to costing the Giants these last 2 games.
So you originally said, at least here earlier today, you said that you would see Washington end up winning the NFC East. Do you stand by that, or do you think the Giants will end up making the playoffs?
I think it's a battle between those two teams, but I'm leaning towards Washington, not trying to sound like a pessimist here. But the Washington football team, I think, has a significantly easier schedule. Now, the good news is, the Giants winning in Seattle proves that they can beat anyone, I think, on any given day, especially if their defense comes to play. Are the games the Giants have coming up against Arizona and Cleveland a little bit more winnable now? I'd say so, but they are still going to be very tricky. They have a road game in Baltimore that, again, similar to the Seattle game, I would be surprised if they pull that off. Washington has Seattle here coming up. And I don't expect the Seattle offense to struggle this badly every week. They're way too talented for that. So Washington could lose that game, but they also have games against the 49ers, who are pretty inconsistent and banged up, and the Panthers, who are going through a rebuild coming up. And I'd say that gives them the edge. But if they do finish with the same record, the Giants would be in.
The doggone Jets. The doggone Jets. That's who we're talking about now. I mean, oh my gosh, what about this? This team is just week after week. They show no fight whatsoever. The team has given up on them. The players have given up on them. The coaching staff has been bad. The management has been bad. This organization is just bad. And we saw it again. Greg Williams is out of town. And it's tough to watch for Jets fans, but there's an end result to this. But then again, it's weird. This Jets team lost a heartbreaker.
They sure did. And it was just in what might be the most Jets fashion imaginable. Just incredible, mind-numbing stupidity at the end of that game. So, well, I'll start with the positive here. That is, the Jets offense actually got in the end zone 4 times in this game, and it looked like the game was starting to get away from them when they were down 24-13 in the third quarter. But they came back with 2 touchdowns. They had that 2-point conversion, so they're up 28-24. So a field goal is useless, and the Jets should have gotten out of there with a win. I know that that's probably not good long term. So this keeps the Jets in the driver's seat for that first pick. But just looking at this particular game, the Jets got to stop up by 4 with 1 minute and 37 seconds left on the clock. That should have been enough to get them the win, but we'll skip ahead to what everyone's here for. When the Raiders get to midfield, the Jets, with 13 seconds left on the clock and Vegas out of timeouts, the Jets need to just play back and keep everything in front of them. 1 tackle inbounds and the game is over. And for some incredibly stupid reason that I still can't figure out, Greg Williams sends a 0 blitz, 7 guys blitzing the quarterback, leaving his inexperienced and terrible corners one-on-one islands. And Ruggs beat the NFL's second best Lamar Jackson easily. And if you look at the film, Nelson Aguilar was wide open too. I am not blaming this on the Jets players there. It wouldn't matter if Darrelle Revis was out there. He was still not going to have a chance against the fastest player in the NFL in Henry Ruggs. It's just no safety help over the top. You are just asking for your corners to get burned at that point. It's just incredibly dumb. There's no other way to put it. Greg Williams, excuse me. Greg Williams got fired the day after the game, earlier today as we're recording this. And I don't usually say one play should get somebody fired, but I agree with it in this instance. I know that Williams has a reputation for calling that, so I've backed off he was intentionally tanking theory, but oh my goodness. I mean, the Jets player should have put a bounty out on him for that.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, it was disastrous. And I wish that ball would have gone to Aguilar. I mean, I had him going in DFS. That would have actually helped me out big time. But other than that, my goodness, you're exactly right. I saw a tweet from Dan Orlovsky. He broke down what took place with the defensive coordinator, Greg Williams. He's done this before, and it's usually his calling card. You know how in Home Alone, they're the wet bandits. They leave their calling card behind. Well, Greg Williams, he sends an all-out blitz when the game is on the line. So when that happens, just expect it. And that's what they did. They brought in another tight end to block for him, set up more time for Carr, who throws one of the best deep balls in the league statistically, dropped back there, had enough time to eat a sandwich behind that offensive line, slung it down the field. Touchdown, Henry Ruggs. Is about the only thing he's done since coming into the league. But my goodness, that was just an absolute disaster.
It was. It's just mind-numbing. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, Adam Gase should be fired too. And I thought it was a really interesting interview when they talked to him after Williams was fired. He said, "Oh yeah, it was my choice to fire him, and yeah, I didn't like the call, but yeah, I wish I called timeout before that play." Dude, I mean, this is definitely partially your responsibility too. Or I understand that you did not make that play call. Greg Williams does deserve more criticism for that specific play, but you're both idiots, and you're still a sitting duck who will be gone in 4 more games, mercifully for this Jets fan base. It was just weird. You see Gase earlier in the week begin to accept some responsibility for not developing Sam Darnold enough. And you're like, okay, sure, there's a little bit of accountability, but obviously way too little, way too late. He could have done that last season. It's just, it's the look of a man who's desperate to try to save a little face to try to get some other job in the NFL after he is fired this season. And I just don't see that happening unless he wants to take a significant reduction to a position coach like Freddie Kitchens is the Giants tight end coach right now, for example. I could see it being something like that. He does not deserve a job in the NFL. Neither does Greg Williams, who's had some questionable choices going back to his days with the Saints and the Browns before he came to the Jets. And it's just a good thing for them that this isn't going to last much longer, but we're going to see the finger pointing start here. Marcus May, one of the Jets' better players on defense, called out that play call from Williams after the game, said, you got to help us out a little bit here. And he's right. The Jets do not have a lot of talent. They're going to lose a lot of games. They do not need the coaching to put them in more difficult positions. It's just not a smart approach.
Now, I know we talked about this a little bit already, but this is actually, I'm throwing a curveball here. Now, I want to quote Zach Grady, who is he was an intern at 104.5 The Fan, actually 104.5 The Team at ESPN. He was actually an intern there, but he was on the air, and he brought up a good point. So I want to quote him real quick. Everybody expects the Jets to fire Adam Gase, except for Joe Douglas and Adam Gase. Those are the only two that think that they could stay there. Now, look, I heard some of his points, and he said this. He had a great run late last season. You can't really put everything into effect based on last season, but if Joe Douglas is committed to him after seeing what he did the season prior, I know it's still a long shot, but who would want to come to the Jets and who would be a better option than what they have right now? I mean, I beg to differ, of course, but I mean, if Joe Douglas doesn't see it, this guy could be around in New York next year.
Yeah, I don't see that happening because if Gase is back for 2021, somebody's going to put Joe Douglas's head on a stick, and rightfully so. Now, obviously, we both disagree with that line of thinking. I don't think Douglas is actually seriously considering keeping Gase around. But there is one more point I want to bring up. So Gase said that he's the one who had the decision to fire Greg Williams. How in the hell does he still have any power in this organization? He shouldn't. He's made several stupid decisions in terms of play calling, personnel, just you name it. He doesn't take the accountability. He has just been a liability in every aspect of the Jets coaching job. And the fact that he still has the power to fire a defensive coordinator speaks to the warped power structure in the Jets organization. Their ownership has been a problem for a very long time. We saw Johnson go out and make some controversial comments before this season started with some of the controversial issues that the U.S. has been facing over the summer. And it's just things that distract the Jets from the product on the field, which is bad. So the fact that you're distracted from the football, you could look at that in a good sense, but it's also just a great representation of how poorly the Jets front office structure is, how poorly their ownership is designed, and the fact that Gase has any authority left in that building is still mind-boggling to me because he should have lost those privileges at the beginning of this season at the latest.
Yeah, going back to that game real quick before we switch over to the Bills. Excited to talk about them today, of course, on the Big City Sports Podcast. But here we are with the Jets. I mean, you look at what they did. Yes, they scored a lot of touchdowns, but the thing that shocked me is it was Sam Darnold under center. Usually when they put up the big offensive days, it's Joe Flacco. So did you see anything you liked out of Darnold, or was it still the same old Darnold out there?
Overall, I thought he had one of his better games. He absolutely deserves some credit. He was extending plays. We know he has the athleticism, and I liked on that touchdown he ran in himself. He just trucked over the Raiders defender right there. I mean, he is still very clearly playing with a lot of heart and a lot of effort. He's just making a lot of mental errors in terms of throwing frequently into double or triple coverage or not knowing when to take a sack or throw the ball away. It's similar things we've talked about with Trubisky or Daniel Jones when they're at their worst. They're not knowing when to cut their losses. Darnold did a better job in this game. It was mostly quicker horizontal concepts. They got Jamison Crowder involved more in the slot, lining him up over each side of the field and just getting him in space. And in theory, that is a much better way to approach because the Jets do have a decent set of skill position players players, at least at wide receiver. We've seen flashes from Denzel Mims and Rashad Perriman as well. And the Jets really should be getting them involved more. We haven't seen it enough. And I do want to give a brief mention here to the Jets running game. I thought Ty Johnson and Josh Adams both played pretty well. Hopefully that's something they can build off of here the rest of the season, because they really haven't had much of a running game until this week.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. It stunk to see Frank Gore come out, of course, with a concussion, but both of the guys behind him stepped up and played well. Now, on a more promising note, we're talking about the Buffalo Bills. They're a smoking hot football team right now. Their defense is finally getting healthy. You have Josh Allen slinging it to anybody. Cole Beasley had the big game on Monday Night Football. I'm just excited about this Bills team. I mean, they did a good job of piecing it together and building around someone you trust, and that's Josh Allen. What do you like out of the Bills?
I like a lot of things that they've been doing here. Well, I know what the last time we talked about them, I mentioned one of the reasons for the dramatic offensive improvement is that the Bills designed this system to fit his strengths, and then they surrounded him with improved playmakers. That is the best way to see what you really have in a franchise quarterback. The Bills went out, got Stephon Diggs, obviously. Cole Beasley is a perfect fit in the slot for a guy who likes to extend plays with his legs. Allen has taken a huge step forward, which is what you want to see from a guy you drafted 7th overall in his 3rd season. They've invested some resources into the offensive line and the running back position. They've put him in the best scenario to succeed. That is the most important thing. Brandon Beane deserves a lot of credit for that, coming over from Carolina. He's done a fantastic job. And the defense has definitely improved as they've gotten players back. Matt Milano came back for the game tonight against San Francisco, which is a huge boost to that defense. And they deserve a lot of credit because that front seven is significantly improved after a rough start, and they're creating and forcing a lot of turnovers as well.
The defensive line isn't just one name that's stepping up. It's a collective effort that puts them top 10 in the league in sacks. So they've been doing a lot of damage when it comes to their defensive line. And then you got Tre'Davious White back, of course, and that's a big boost. He's one of the most underrated corners in the league, in my opinion. But on the offensive side, I love the tandem. I didn't like it at first, but at running back, you have Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Zach Moss usually gets the touchdowns when they do score. Singletary only has 1 on the year, but he's done a lot in the receiving department. So I've liked what I've seen out of the running game there. And of course, Josh Allen gets his fair share of runs himself, but they've done a great job of scheming around them. Sean McDermott deserves a lot of credit, their head coach. I mean, this team looks like they could potentially go on a serious run.
They could, and I know Bills fans don't want to jinx that. Yeah, it's been a long time since they've won a playoff game. I get it, but there is one thing I want to mention that I still think they need to improve on, and that is their running game. I don't think that the talent is lacking there. Singletary and Moss are more than capable. They have complementing skill sets. That's great. But I do want to bring up a Cover One article, actually. They're primarily covering the Bills, and they brought up a couple of great points here. One thing that the Bills offense was doing better last season was running the ball, especially on outside runs. This year, they have struggled with that a lot. They haven't been running it outside as often. The Bills are basically running a spread offense. With Josh Allen's improvement, it's a very pass-happy offense. And when they do run the ball, because they spread out the defenses side to side so much, they're trying to run the ball up the middle, and it's just not been as effective. That's not Devin Singletary's strength in particular. He's more of an elusive back, and it has limited their effectiveness there. Overall, the Bills offense is still taking a huge step forward, and that's worth it. You understand that running it up the middle because the defense is so spread out, because there's less guys in the box, but it just hasn't been as effective as they would have liked. The receiving, the blocking on the outside hasn't been quite as great as you could have hoped for. Overall, obviously, well worth the trade-off with Allen's improvement and the huge upgrade in the passing game. But it is something that they're going to need to improve at least a little if they want to make a serious run, because they're going to need to be able to run the ball. They could run those zone reads with Josh Allen in order to take time off the clock if they're trying to ice a game in the 4th quarter.
Stephon Diggs is a great addition to that football team. I mean, you could argue that he is the biggest upgrade at any position of any team, maybe Tom Brady in Tampa. But outside of him, I mean, Stephon Diggs has stepped in there, got over the 1,000-yard marker on Monday Night Football, and he's done a great job for that Bills team, especially you saw last year with Josh Allen. All he had was John Brown. That was like his main go-to guy. Now he's more of a deep threat, but still, he had John Brown and a bunch of no-name guys that he just sling the ball down the field to that were pretty fast. But because he has the big arm. He can hit him like that. But I mean, outside of him, Stephon Diggs comes in now. You move John Brown to your 2. Cole Beasley's a great slot receiver. You have Croft and Knox, who have been phenomenal tight ends, both pairing them equally as well. So I'm excited about this Bills team. Do you think they have a realistic shot at making it to the Super Bowl?
I think they're I think they're more AFC championship game type of material. I have a hard time seeing them getting past the Chiefs if they end up playing them in that AFC championship, but I don't think it's impossible. That defense is legit. If they're healthy, they will have a shot. And Josh Allen's improvement makes their ceiling a lot higher, but there are still a couple of things I worry about on that team. One thing I did want to mention with that run game really quick that do want to bring up that's part of the reason they've struggled is Josh Allen is blitzed a lot, more than almost any other quarterback in the NFL. That has a big impact on the running game as well. He's done a much better job making plays against the blitz and extending them with his legs, but it is something that has limited their effectiveness in the running game. And we've seen that to an extent with teams like Pittsburgh, who can't really run the ball despite their success in the passing game and their legitimate defense. I see a lot of similarities with the Bills offense at this point.
That's a good point. I mean, both of these teams are just, you see the same thing with Pittsburgh. I mean, no matter who the running back is there, we've had Benny Snell most recently because of Connor being out the last 2, but there's just, I'd like to see Pittsburgh get over the hump and run the ball like that. And of course you'd like to see it for the Bills too, but right now, I think the Bills can make it to the Super Bowl, but they'd have to have a lot of things go right. I think the schedule that they play in the playoffs has to be pretty favorable to their matchup so they can exploit. And then in order to get to the Super Bowl, I think the Chiefs would have to be knocked out, which is pretty hard.
Agreed. There are definitely a lot of variables that would have to line up in their favor, but I don't think it's impossible. I do like their chances a little bit more than Pittsburgh, or at least think they're a more complete team that's less likely to be knocked out or upset early. Not saying that that can't happen. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to be the team to beat in the AFC, but I'd love to see the Bills host a playoff game. We'll see those fans jumping through the tables in the parking lot. Just brings me back to going to those games. They can enjoy the wings like they should, man. It's a great place. They got a fantastic fan base. I'd love to, at the very least, see the Bills win a playoff game, but they can't get complacent. As well as they've been playing, there are still some worrying signs on the defense. They struggled a bit in the Seattle and Arizona games, of course, and the DeAndre Hopkins, of course, made an amazing play, but the pass defense can still improve a little bit. As much as I like what the Bills have been doing, I don't want them to get complacent. The defense still has some room for improvement. We're seeing some inconsistencies with them in the Seattle and the Arizona games in recent weeks. But I do want to mention that Miami and New England have both been playing much improved football as well. I'm not saying that the Bills are in serious danger of not winning that division as of yet, but if they lose a divisional game here, it's not a done deal at this point. So Miami and New England have both been playing much better football in recent weeks, so they just have to make sure to stay focused and lock down that division so they can host a playoff game and put themselves in an advantageous spot here to start the opening round.
You like the Bills more than the Steelers?
I think they're less likely to be upset in the opening rounds. We've seen Pittsburgh lose more guys to injuries here. You have Devin Bush getting injured here in recent weeks. The offense, they're becoming incredibly one-dimensional. I don't think that's going to be fully fixed when James Conner comes back either. I do think they're a bit of an overrated team. As much as I think they're good, before the Washington game, they escaped a couple of games. They escaped the Baltimore game when they were missing half their team on the Wednesday afternoon in peak 2020 fashion. They were definitely due for a loss. They're still a very good team, but I do think they're a little bit more vulnerable. I know that there's not a ton of statistical evidence to back that up. Maybe just call it a gut feeling on my end, but I think they are exposed to a possible early exit.
I like your confidence there. I mean, I actually am sold on the Steelers. I think they're a pretty solid football team, but you mentioned the linebacker depth is huge. You lost Bud Dupree along with Devin Bush. That's huge. But if they do end up making a run that gets them to a Super Bowl, one underrated signing or trade that they made was Avery Williamson. Because if you didn't make that trade with the loss of Bud Dupree and Devin Bush, you would be in danger on that defensive side.
Yeah, I think the linebacker spot is a similar weakness in Pittsburgh, even with Williamson, as it is in Green Bay. That's the Packers' biggest weakness on that side of the ball. It's the biggest weakness for Pittsburgh as well. If teams can attack them at the second level, they will be vulnerable to a high-scoring shootout type of game, and you never know how those could go.
If only the Packers had one Alec Martinez. But we're going to talk about the Major League Baseball right now. The Chicago Cubs. We haven't discussed it yet, but if you are new to this and only get your news from us, Theo Epstein is gone. Theo Epstein is gone a year before. Jed Hoyer takes over. He most recently took over the last time he was a general manager, or last time he was a president that he had his own team, was in San Diego. He was with the Padres, actually made the trade for Anthony Rizzo there from the Red Sox. But Jed Hoyer was with Theo Epstein in Boston, with Theo Epstein in Chicago. He's been by his side the whole way. And it seems like whenever he let him go, it was like Theo said, "Hey, little buddy, it's your turn to run the show." So it's Jed's show now. Are you excited about that, or do you think that they should have looked elsewhere?
I don't have a problem with it. I don't think having Jed Hoyer run the show is going to change a ton, considering they've been together as sidekicks here for several years, going back to when they were with Boston. So I would be surprised if the Cubs' philosophical approach changes too much. But I guess we will see that here coming up with the free agency starting to heat up and the hot stove rumors and everything. The more pressing issue is just how the Cubs are going to address that offense, which struggled mightily throughout the 2020 season. And I don't think they have a ton of in-house options to really improve that a lot here for 2021.
Yeah, and one name that is no longer on that offense is Kyle Schwarber. There were debates across Chicagoland on if Kyle Schwarber should be considered a legend. Me personally, I think of the phrase heroes get remembered, but legends never die. And Kyle Schwarber has had the emotional journey that had Cubs fans and people in Chicago absolutely fall in love with that story and just be attached to him because he came back. I still remember getting the text notification from John Paul Morosi on Twitter that said Kyle Schwarber taking batting practice in Arizona. And it's like September, October right now. And here he is coming off an ACL injury in April, getting ready to play in the World Series. It was just, I still remember that great emotional journey for Kyle Schwarber. It's sad to see him end it, but it was the right move. It was the right move for the Cubs because you've had a lot of swing and miss from him, a lot of swing and miss in that lineup and limited production. So as much as it pains me to say, Kyle Schwarber, we cannot be attached to these players. If we're attached to these players, we're never going to be okay with anything they do. And it's actually a smart move to get rid of them right now.
It's a very tough spot. If you want to go into that legend debate, basically anyone who had a significant role in helping end the Cubs championship drought can be considered a legend. I know it's a different way of thinking about it, but seriously, if they had an important part, considering that huge monkey on their backs in helping the Cubs finally snap that drought, I'm on board with considering them a team legend, even if they only were valuable for a couple of seasons. Schwarber, like most of the Cubs, had a very rough 2020. He was hitting below 200, the lowest average of any qualified hitter in the National League. And he is also a liability in the outfield as well. And it's no guarantee that the DH will be in the National League in 2021. And even if it is, he would still have to rotate, I believe, because we're seeing American League teams, instead of having a full-time DH, they're rotating guys through the DH spot to give them half a day off. And I know that that's a practice that would carry over to the National League as well, and did in the 2020 season. I think the Cubs are going to look for a little bit more consistency and a better fielder. I could see them going after Eddie Rosario, who was non-tendered by Minnesota. He would be a similar replacement with a 280 batting average and a better fielder as well. I think he'd be a good target.
Yeah, Schwarber has improved in his defense these last few years, but the stats do not show the tape. If you show the tape, Kyle Schwarber's routes to the balls sometimes just are mind-boggling. You have no idea what he's doing out there. He has no idea what he's doing out there. But the thing that gets his fielding percentage or sabermetrics, any of that technical stuff that you want to look into, that really sets him apart as a fielder that's shown this improvement is his arm. His arm has been one of the best in left field that I've seen in a long time. I mean, you don't have a big, usually the left fielder is someone with a weak arm that can field the position and hit, but he's actually had a pretty solid arm that goes back to his catcher days. But I think one name they should consider 100%. Yes, there's injury issues here. David Dahl. David Dahl's a left-handed hitter who got non-tendered by the Rockies. He's had some pretty serious injuries in his career, but he's still super young, left-handed, and he drives in runs. That's what you need. You don't need someone that's going to come in there and strike out 150 times and just add to that defense. I think you need to bring in someone that has a left-handed bat and can play the outfield, whether it's Michael Brantley or David Dahl, someone like that can actually come in there and drive in runs. It's one of the most underrated stats in Major League Baseball is driving in runs, RBIs. I want someone on my team that gets RBIs and gets on base. Those are the two most things that teams should look for in hitters or just ball players in general, because I've seen it time after time with this Cubs team. There's so much swing and miss, and there's no run production on a consistent basis, and it's what got them eliminated in the playoffs.
Well, swing and miss is definitely seeing something more of across baseball. Every single year, there's a strikeout record set. The approach isn't really putting the ball in play as much in terms of getting on base. It's kind of the money ball approach. You shouldn't look to buy players. You should look to buy wins. And to buy wins, you have to buy runs. And to get runs, you have to get guys who are on base frequently. So I'm not disagreeing with that logic. The Cubs, unfortunately, had a decent amount of free swingers, didn't draw a ton of walks. That had an impact on them as well. I was also going to mention Michael Brantley as a possibility as a left-handed outfielder who played very well in Houston the last couple of years and with Cleveland before that. You mentioned Dahl. I still think Rosario is similar logic there, a left-handed outfielder who has a decent amount of pop. There is some strikeout risk with him, not so much with Brantley, who's been fantastic at getting on base. And I think you could look at potentially a left-handed bat who could fill the infield as well, or be a leadoff hitter who sets the table. Maybe the Cubs try to make up for the mistake of trading Tommy La Stella for so little because he's turned into such a valuable player. They could try to bring him in. They could buy low on a switch hitter like Jurickson Profar. I could see him having a role somewhere if San Diego decides not to keep him around. And I do think they need to address that bullpen as well. I could see Jeremy Jeffries being a target there. They need somebody who can set up or be a fallback option if Kimbrel continues to disappoint as the closer.
I think there's going to be a hole at third base. I do. There's going to be a hole at third base. Chris Bryant should be on his way out of town. I mean, they're going to trade him for nickels on the dollar. He's going to get nothing. But another name that will get traded no matter what, in my opinion, is Wilson Contreras. If they don't, they're going to set themselves up for failure. We talked about Contreras in an episode before, but he holds the most value right now. 2 years of control, improved to a top 10 framer, which was his biggest weakness in the year before. But I mean, he hits the ball so hard in a year that teams are going after Real Muto and McCann, and there's a lot of teams that need catching help. I think a trade for Contreras would be smart on their part and smart for the Cubs because you have Amaya waiting in the wings. So Contreras and Bryant, I think, are on their way out of town. I wouldn't be surprised to see a Javier Baez extension. But then again, I think third base might need a spot to be looked at. You do have David Bodie, but I don't know what all he's going to bring.
He could if the Cubs, wrong Chicago team. If the Cubs are looking with Bodie, they could bring in a guy like La Stella to platoon. I don't think that would be a terrible idea. But you mentioned trading Contreras away. The way that a team gets better is by dealing from an area of strength to address an area of weakness. The Cubs do have some solid organizational depth at the catcher spot. If they are able to sell high on Contreras, which they have a better chance of doing, because at this point, if they do trade Chris Bryant, they wouldn't be selling high. They'd be selling very low. And it's a big risk because he does have the talent that he could easily bounce back with whoever he gets traded to. So I don't think the Cubs are going to rush into a trade unless it becomes a toxic type of situation. It could be kind of similar to how the Rockies approach trading Nolan Arenado, which I think will happen eventually. But considering the toxicity in that relationship with the player and the team, it might torpedo the value before he gets sold off. So the Cubs do need to be very cognizant of that. But they're also going to have to remember that they're not going to have a ton of leverage if they do look to trade him. So it would definitely limit the return. So trading Contreras, I think, would be a smarter step where they could get appropriate value. But I don't think he's going to be the only move because the core from that World Series team is starting to show some cracks.
This is very bold. It won't happen. They need to trade Ian Happ. I think they need to trade Ian Happ. Switch hitter, ton of swing and miss in his game. He's been up and down in the outfield. He's a streaky hitter, and I do not like streaky hitters. Now, I'm not saying you trade him right away, but one Chris Bryant trade proposal I want to talk about. How about you send him to the Washington Nationals? They need a third baseman. God forbid they got rid of Rendon. Send him to the Washington Nationals. Get Carter Keyboom. Keyboom will play second base, third base. You got Horner there. A lot of youth on that infield, but you still bring in that could eventually evolve into one of those star players.
It would be interesting. I honestly think the Cubs would have to throw in more because the Nationals are going to value Keyboom very highly. And we saw how much value Eaton's contract had when he was traded from the White Sox. It's clear that these young, productive guys who have multiple years left on their contracts are not going to come cheap. It's going to be more than a rental type of situation. So the Cubs might be able to make that work. I like the logic, but the Nationals also value those guys highly. And even though they had a down season, there's way too much talent on that team. I'd be surprised if they look to do anything too drastic.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about the Mets real quick. The Mets have made a move, and it's not Steve Cohen, but the Mets have brought in relief pitcher Trevor May. Trevor May is going to come in there, help out that bullpen, which is already a strength on that team. And I think the Mets are looking upwards. This is not going to be their only move, though.
Not at all. Trevor May is one of the first free agents to sign a contract with a new team here this winter. He's a very hard-throwing right-handed reliever who provides the Mets a little bit of insurance in case Edwin Diaz, who significantly improved in his second year in Queens, regresses, which is possible. Also provides some insurance for a guy like Dylan Betances, who is also a hard thrower, but very injury-prone. He had a pretty up and down, mostly down season in the Mets bullpen. They had some struggles with Chasen Shreve as well, and the Mets definitely are looking up. Their starting rotation, as usual, should be a strength, and I don't think that they're done there either. I think they're going to pick up another guy to try to fill out that rotation who eats innings better than Rick Porcello or Michael Wacha did this past season. The Mets are going to be big players. They're going to end up with at least one big free agent, if not more. They have unlimited financial resources at this point, and they also are in the market for an infielder because Robinson Cano got suspended and is going to miss the entire 2021 season. The Mets are absolutely going to be aggressive trying to replace him, and they're going to do a little bit better than they did when they got Jed Lowry a couple years ago.
I'm going to bring up a name that you mentioned already to fill that spot. I think it's Tommy La Stella. La Stella would be a phenomenal fit there. You already have, I guess he's a similar player to Jeff McNeil. Maybe he doesn't give the power there, but two left-handed sticks like that will be nice in your lineup. If the DH stays, it's looking more and more like it's not. I would assume Dom Smith would maybe move to the outfield. Try him out there in spring, see how he looks. If not, then I don't know what you're going to do with him. But it's crazy to think about. There's rumors that they're in on LeMahieu. We talked about actually in the last episode that we talked baseball was what if LeMahieu wanted 5 with the Mets and 4 with the Yankees, years, of course. And that's actually playing out right now. So we don't know what it's going to be, but I just think if they swing and miss on LeMahieu, La Stella would still be a great addition to that baseball team.
He would, and the Mets do have a pretty solid amount of lefty-righty balance in that lineup as well. You got to mention Conforto, the left-handed bat, in that outfield, Dom Smith as well, and then some stable guys on the right side, especially with Pete Alonso, of course. And they are going to bring in a catcher. They non-tendered Wilson Ramos. I would be very surprised if the Mets don't end up with James McCann. They've been very heavy after him. He makes perfect sense for that team, another consistent right-handed bat in that lineup. Andres Jimenez was a fantastic fit in at the shortstop position as well. Really took over for Rosario and provided some stability. And looking at that pitching rotation, I think a good target for them would be Jake Odorizzi. I think he would be a solid buy low, high reward type of candidate behind Jacob deGrom. Marcus Stroman accepted that qualifying offer. Peterson had a fantastic rookie year, and Syndergaard should be coming back from Tommy John at some point in 2021 as well. If the Mets can get a solid defender, they've had some infield defense struggles in recent years that can go behind that Mets rotation. It could really thrive.
I just thought of a trade proposal. It involves the Cubs and the Mets. Now, here we go. The Chicago Cubs will send catcher Wilson Contreras and pitching prospect left-hander Justin Steele to the New York Mets for David Peterson, starting pitcher. First baseman, you get Dom Smith and you get Brandon Nimmo. Those 3 for those 2. You get control with Nimmo. He can step in, play center field. You move half to left. You have Dom Smith. If Rizzo ends up leaving, I wouldn't assume he would, but you have Dom Smith, who's had a pretty solid year, and he could eventually transfer to the outfield. We've seen him do it with Schwarber. And you have Dylan Peterson, who can step into that rotation and fill the John Lester role with some youth behind him as well.
I would be surprised if the Mets get rid of David Peterson so quickly, considering how promising he was in that rookie shortened season. I know that it was a small sample size, but we all know how important pitching depth is, and the Mets are going to want to keep him around. I would be surprised there. I could see them getting rid of Dom Smith, especially if the DH is not part of the 2021 season in the National League, because they're not really going to have a consistent role for him. If the Cubs were to acquire him, obviously there would be other moves coming. There would have to be some moving parts. I do like the creativity, because I don't know how long-term of a fit Brandon Nimmo is going to be. As much as I like him, I could see him being a piece that's moved to try to shore up weaknesses on the Mets roster. But at the same time, if they're in the market where they could sign McCann or JT Realmuto as a free agent, I would be surprised if they traded for a catcher instead.
How about Steve Cohen on Twitter? That's one of the most feel-good stories of 2020 that I've just enjoyed. He's on Twitter interacting with fans. He said David Dahl was one of the non-tenders, and he's out there saying, Mets fans, what do you think about him? And he's just interacting with them. That's like the coolest thing ever, that an owner is such a big team fan person that he's just all in on Twitter. That's one of the best things I've seen from the Mets this year.
It is a very contagious energy, and it's the most competent the Mets have sounded in a very long time. They finally get a toxic owner out of the situation, and the Mets fans know just how do I put this? Disastrous the Wilpon tenure in New York was, the constant interference. I am curious to see Sandy Alderson's role in his second go around as the president of baseball operations in Queens as well. But they're going to be serious players. They're going to be going after the big fish. I would be a little surprised if they go for a guy like Bauer, just because the starting rotation is so good, but don't put it past them. It could be that Phillies approach where they added Roy Oswalt to that rotation that had Roy Halladay and Cliff Lee and Cole Hamels, really trying to build on a strength and also prevent their rival teams from acquiring a similar player. And I know that they're going to make a run after George Springer as well. I'm very curious to see where he ends up.
Yeah, he'd be a nice fit there. I mean, he's not a left-hander, but he kind of reminds me a little bit of Carlos Beltran. I mean, someone that can come in there, play defense to an extent, and he was actually one of the best defensive center fielders in all of baseball this year. I actually saw a graphic on MLB Network. They paired him up to Billy Hamilton, Kevin Pillar, and Jackie Bradley, and George Springer was the best defensively out of those four. So, I mean, that probably helps his value a lot wherever he ends up. But I'm excited, like you said, about George Springer. I think Queens could be a fit for him.
As long as he ends up there, if he has a tenure more like what Beltran did when he signed with the Mets compared to what happened when they ended up with Jason Bay, I'm sure they will be fine with that. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
For sure. But we're going to talk about the Twitter poll question of the week that took place last week, and we'll pop the results up here now. Twitter poll question of the week: when both Nagy and Gase are fired, we assume, which head coach opening is more attractive? Fans voted 77.8%. The Bears' job is more attractive. The Jets' job got 22.2%. I'm actually baffled by that. I thought the Jets' job would be a little bit more interesting. What are your thoughts about the poll results?
Yeah, I actually was one of those. I know we both agreed that the Jets job would be more interesting for a coach. And I stand by that, because the Jets coach is going to get to come in with that talented rookie quarterback that they're going to draft first overall and really get to build the roster from the ground up. The Bears coach, whoever it is, and even if Ryan Pace is retained, if he's not retained, the Bears new coach is going to have to deal with a bloated type of roster that's kind of stuck in the middle between a playoff contending team or a team in a true rebuild mode. And they're going to have to clear out a lot of that clutter that Pace and company have assembled over the last 6 seasons.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. I'm glad that we got some votes on that. Before we get to our poll question of the week, one more name I wanted to mention that is no longer with the Cubs organization is TV play-by-play announcer Len Casper. He was the great voice of that team. I loved him. He's the voice of my childhood. I mean, I'd turn on Cubs baseball, whether I'm eating a popsicle in August at 8 years old, sitting in the garage. I mean, Len Casper, Aramis with a drive. I mean, he was just amazing. Now he's going to the White Sox on the radio. So good for him. He's excited about that opportunity. Always wanted to do radio, but kudos to Len Casper on his next journey.
No doubt. He's definitely going to be somebody missed. Speaking of the White Sox, do we want to talk a little bit breaking news here that we got right before we recorded?
Yeah, White Sox, they acquired Lance Lynn. Wow, that is a stunner and a dunner because Dan Dunning is going to Texas. But my goodness, I do not understand this move. I mean, I guess it's nice for the short term, but Lance Lynn is sort of going downhill in my opinion. His age is not the best, and you just traded one of a starter that showed up for you deep down the season.
Well, Lance Lynn has had some of his best seasons here with Texas in recent years. He pitched decently briefly for the Yankees when they acquired him at the deadline a couple off seasons ago, but he has really thrived in Texas, and he absolutely does have some value. He's got that contract situation as well. Dane Dunning was sent back to Texas along with a prospect named Avery Weems. Just saw that here a minute ago. So overall, I think Texas did a pretty good job in this trade, but I at least understand what the White Sox are doing. They're very clearly signaling they're trying to go for it. They're trying to win right now. We all know how talented that lineup is. And even with Dunning out of the picture now, look at that rotation. You still have Giolito, still have Dallas Keuchel, still have Dylan Cease. And don't forget Michael Kopech is going to be coming back here at some point from his injuries, and he could be a factor in there as well. So there's a lot of depth. The White Sox do still need to worry about that bullpen and see what happens with Alex Colomé, who's a free agent. But as much as giving up Dunning, I'm not a huge fan of. They gave up a solid amount for Lance Lynn. If he pitches like he has in Texas the last couple seasons, he will be an important contributor to one of the contenders in the American League.
I think Michael Kopech is the most interesting name going into the season for the White Sox. And talk about a rough year. It's been a rough year for everybody, but him. Not only did he have to have Tommy John surgery, but he's having a baby with his wife, who is now his ex-wife. They're getting divorced, and it's just been rough for him. He tried coming back. That's probably one of the reasons he opted out. He said he wanted to keep the baby safe. He's had coming off Tommy John, of course, and then it was a tough year for him. So I'm excited to see him get back up on the big league mound to see what he could bring to the White Sox next year.
If he can stay healthy, I think he can bring a lot. You got to temper expectations a little bit considering some very limited experience at major league play, but that upside is through the roof. And if he even touches any of that in 2021, it will be a major bonus to a team that has a ton of young talent, especially in that lineup. We know how much talent they have in terms of hitters on both sides of the plate. And that starting rotation seems to be getting closer to finalized as well for what we can expect next season.
And Adam Eaton. Adam Eaton gets you that outfielder that you're in a veteran stick like that. And they got fleeced. The Nationals got fleeced in that trade with Adam Eaton. I mean, there's no other way around it. Reynaldo Lopez hasn't been the best, but he's still given the White Sox innings during their bad years. Giolito's been a stud. I mean, it was a solid trade for the White Sox for sure. We're going to talk about the poll question of the week for this week. And we mentioned the name earlier. Who is more likely to sign Kyle Schwarber? Would it be the Chicago White Sox or would it be the New York Yankees? I mean, this is definitely an interesting topic because both teams should be players in the signing of him. Who do you think will sign Kyle Schwarber, and do you think it's one of these teams or more than the other?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I honestly could see him being a fit for both teams. Brian Cashman, the Yankees GM, has shown interest in Schwarber before, so I would be surprised if they don't make a play for him. Although the Yankees do typically prioritize defense a little bit in the outfield, and a lot of that's dependent on what happens with Brett Gardner as well. Even though, of course, he's nearing the end of his career, the Yankees could also make room if they wanted to trade a guy like Aaron Hicks, which I don't think is out of the question. In terms of the White Sox side of things, I'd be very curious to see what role he would have on that team, considering the outfield talent they have, and of course, Lewis Robert being locked in at center field. But I'm leaning towards he would want to stay in Chicago and sign with the White Sox to bring in a bit of a veteran presence to a mostly young lineup. But I don't think I'd be surprised if either one of them end up signing him.
That'll make Cubs fans really happy. Not only will you see it, you'll be playing in a homestand. You'll have Len Casper on the radio for the White Sox saying, back-to-back home runs, Eloy Jimenez, Kyle Schwarber, and the White Sox win. So that's going to wrap it up for today. But those are that's an interesting question, I think. If Kyle Schwarber wants a one-year deal, I think the best spot for him is Oakland. I'm going to be honest. He wants to regain his value there. They have some contracts coming off the book. DH, they're just mashed haters in that division. I think he'd be a solid fit there. But like I said, that's going to do it for us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Checking us out on Twitter at the Big City Sports PD. And it's just vote on our poll question of the week, and we will see you.